When Dr. Robert Ballard was gearing up to make one of his expeditions in search of the wreck of the Titanic, he ended up backing away from an investor when he learned that they'd planned to salvage pieces of the wreck in order to break them up and sell them as paperweights. Survivors sold autographs and personal effects, both in the immediate aftermath of the disaster and decades later, in order to pay their mounting bills. The Titanic disaster has inspired the creation of countless commemorative trinkets, from recreations of first-class china sets to model ships to replicas of that tacky-ass Heart of the Ocean pendant from the 1997 movie. I personally own a White Star Line beanie and an ice tray that makes both tiny ice Titanics and little icebergs to float in your drinks. There are Titanic museums in Belfast, Southampton, Las Vegas, Orlando, Branson, Missouri, and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee that attract thousands of visitors each year. There's a traveling exhibition. There's a Titanic VR experience in Los Angeles, California. And of course, there is the wreck of the Titanic, which has been attracting commercial tourists to her depths since 1998. For a price. Sometimes the ultimate price. The public has a multi-million-dollar fascination with Titanic, maybe even multi-billion-dollar. It's hard to quantify. Only some of the Titanic museums disclose their annual earnings, and I haven't personally asked Lego how many $680 Titanic playsets they sell per annum. And this feels weird, right? This commodification of a tragedy. My name is Amanda Hootman, and in this episode, I want to spend a little time unpacking my feelings about the commercialization of Titanic. Has enough time passed that any of this is okay? Is it tasteless and tacky? Is it in the interest of preserving our shared history and heritage? Is visiting her wreck site a pilgrimage to pay respects to the 1,500 lives lost, or a dangerous and irreverent display of wealth? And how the hell did so many people end up with so much coal from the Titanic after Titanic? Why are we like this? When it comes to the limitless Titanic tchotchkes sold by brick and mortar and online retailers the world over, my first impulse is to hand wave the plushies and the keychains and the coal with, well, the sinking is distant enough in time now that people don't really feel the weight of the tragedy anymore. Much like selling American flag merch for Independence Day, the symbols are no longer inextricable from the great loss of life of the events that they're tied to. They're just symbols. But I also know that isn't true. Before a corpse is even cold, someone somewhere will have the bright idea to capitalize on a tragedy by selling traumabilia. In 1997, immediately after Princess Diana's death, Thai Inc. started selling a Princess Diana-themed beanie baby with a tag that read, "Like an angel, she came from heaven above. She shared her compassion, her pain, her love. She only stayed with us long enough to teach the world to share, to give, to reach." Tacky, shameless. But people clamored for those purple bears. They thought those Princess Di bears were the perfect way to commemorate a life cut needlessly short. And what's more, they thought they were going to be collectibles that would pay their kids' tuition one day. Limited edition trauma merch. A princess beanie baby sells for around $3 a pop nowadays. In 2014, the 9/11 Memorial Museum gift shop, built upon the ruins of the World Trade Center, came under fire for selling a cheese board shaped like a map of the United States that featured 3 hearts marking the 3 spots where each of the planes went down on September 11th, 2001. They removed that particular item from the gift shop, but they still sell the usual I Heart New York junk alongside NYPD and NYFD merch and like World Trade Center cross pendants. So clearly, time is not the X factor here. There is a market for tack commemorating disasters and atrocities, whether or not they have occurred within living memory. Time may be why I'm okay with having a Titanic ice cube tray. Not that I haven't spent some mental energy worrying over whether that's really appropriate over the course of making this podcast. And to be sure, maybe some of the more darkly humorous curios have become more prevalent and more socially acceptable with time. Regardless, people love to commemorate tragic world events with junk. I think part of it is a desire to place ourselves within a historical moment. We're like little crows collecting our shiny objects. We're trying to possess, to take physical ownership of history. And perhaps by seeing, touching, placing these little physical manifestations of history up on a shelf, we can come to understand a tragedy better. It is an event made corporeal and therefore easier to manage, conceptualize, and come to terms with. With Titanic in particular, there's another element, a slow process of iconification. Titanic is a celebrity akin to Marilyn Monroe or Elvis in that she has become a recognizable and commodifiable symbol, almost decontextualized from the tragedy that made her famous in the first place. On my other podcast, Respect the Dead, I did a bit of a deep dive into some of the companies that hold the copyrights on dead celebrities' images and use them to sell products. Mostly posters and memorabilia related to the celebrity, but also things like chocolate bars and bottles of wine and other products they were never associated with in life. Celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn are slowly reduced to the clothes they wore, a white halter dress and a black sheath dress, and commodified to the point that their images are almost irrelevant to their actual work. I react much more strongly about this erosion into symbols when it comes to singular people than when it comes to Titanic, but maybe I shouldn't. After all, the loss of Titanic represents the loss of 1,500 people, and also some survivors who didn't, and everyone who would have come after that. But I just don't feel the same revulsion when I see a Titanic ship plushie as I do when I see a Marilyn Monroe Funko Pop. Perhaps that's tragedy plus time, but perhaps it's also scale. If the death of one man is a tragedy and the death of 1,500 is a statistic, what does that mean for Etsy stores selling little kawaii vinyl stickers of a little chibi Titanic smiling at a little chibi iceberg? Let's do a little Google search for Titanic-themed gifts. We've got a miniature wreck site for aquariums. The stern is in remarkable condition in this one. I guess it's less recognizable to most people if the stern is as pancaked as it is in real life. We have dozens of AI-generated prints, mugs, and magnets of the ship, and of a man and a woman that are not quite Jack and Rose. The Pigeon Forge Museum gift shop is the worst offender for these. We have a hideous Heart of the Ocean themed resin lamp on Etsy with the necklace suspended in what looks like lava lamp fluid between two pieces of wood. The only images for this item are AI generated. We have novelty t-shirts screen printed with quips like 1 star, would not recommend this cruise, and images of Captain Smith accompanying the purported quote, "No one remembers the icebergs you don't hit." Charming. And then there's the f***ing coal. Beyond the mass-produced plushies and recreations of China, you can buy Titanic's coal. There's so much of it. Everyone has a damn piece of Titanic's coal. You wouldn't know that they left port during a coal shortage. RMS Titanic Inc. possesses the exclusive salvage rights to Titanic, awarded to them by the U.S. government after a protracted legal battle in the 1990s. RMS Titanic Inc. are a subsidiary of Premier Exhibitions Inc., who manage the touring Titanic exhibition, the permanent exhibit at the Luxor Casino in Las Vegas, and the controversial Bodies traveling exhibit. Due to an agreement made under U.S. law, RMS Titanic Inc. are not allowed to sell the salvaged items of their collection piecemeal in order to preserve the totality of artifacts as a single collection. But apparently, coal doesn't count because you can buy pieces of genuine Titanic coal in little boxes in their gift shops with little certificates promising you that it's the real coal from the real Titanic and not bricks of charcoal from some guy's grill. You can buy coal pressed into coins. You can buy an hourglass where the sand is ground up pieces of Titanic coal. Guys, I just think the coal thing is very stupid. If you bought the coal and you like the coal, that's fine. Whatever. Just what are you doing with it? Displaying it on your desk? Sticking it to the wall? It's a rock. But what about the money being made outside of the tchotchkes? What about the educational material, the museums, the experiences, the artifacts? Ignore the fact that 2 of the Titanic museums are shaped like cheesy replicas of Titanic's bow. Ignore the fact that they do that goofy gimmick where you get a ticket with a passenger's name on them and you find out at the end if you lived or died. These attractions at least have some educational and historical merit. In Las Vegas, you can see the Big Piece, a gigantic section of Titanic's hull that was salvaged in 1998. The violin that was played by Wallace Hartley, the band's leader, and was recovered with his body 2 weeks after the sinking, was purchased at auction by an anonymous collector who has generously loaned the piece to both the Belfast Museum and the museum at Pigeon Forge, the one owned by Dolly Parton. The display of artifacts such as these brings the events of April 14th and April 15th, 1912 into clearer focus and educates each new generation about the tragedy. Hell, even the Titanic VR experience tries to walk the edutainment line. They resurrect historical figures like Thomas Andrews and J. Bruce Ismay with the power of PlayStation 1 quality graphics and have them tell you facts about the ship. It's great. It's fine. I just think it's a shame that the museums are mostly commercial ventures. It's a shame that the 5,000 plus artifacts salvaged by RMS Titanic Inc. are housed in virtual roadside attractions that charge an admittance fee. It's a shame that most of the pieces on display in the other museums are either pre-discovery artifacts picked from the floating corpses of Titanic victims or auctioned off by survivors after the fact. Survivors like Milavina Dean, who was only 2 months old when she survived the disaster and ended up needing to sell autographs and memorabilia like a suitcase her family were given after they reached New York in order to cover her nursing home expenses in old age. It's a shame that Titanic artifacts are mostly the luxury possessions of private collectors that are sometimes on loan to exhibitions and not housed in public museums under the protection and care of public institutions. Because these artifacts are culturally and historically significant and shouldn't be loaned out, hidden away, displayed, or destroyed at the discretion of wealthy buyers. They are part of our shared history. And I'll be honest, I'm also just put off by the chintziness of it all. That's completely a taste thing, but there it is. I don't like Las Vegas getting its stink all over Titanic. Which is just my opinion, man. But there's a much more controversial form of Titanic commercialism that's attracted much more criticism, especially in recent years. Commercial tourism to the wreck site. In In July of 2001, New Yorkers David Leibowitz and Kimberly Miller made history, and pissed a lot of people off, by getting married in a submersible hovering on the deck of the Titanic, 2 miles under the Atlantic Ocean. The wedding was essentially a publicity stunt organized by a commercial diving company, Subsea Explorer, and David and Kimberly won their passage to the wreck in a contest, beating out 28,000 other entries. When accused of trivializing the deaths of more than 1,500 people, David replied that he didn't think of Titanic as a gravesite, and that you'd have to have the same reverence getting married in a church because there's graveyards there too. Got 'em. Commercial tourism to the wreck of Titanic began in the late 1990s, with companies like Deep Ocean Exhibitions selling passage for around $32,500, around $65K in 2026 prices. Titanic's wreck site occupies the center of a Venn diagram of 3 kinds of tourism. Titanic tourism, obviously, the pilgrimage to places and things related to the Titanic. Thanatourism, tourism to places associated with death, tragedy, and calamity. And extreme tourism, a form of tourism that is almost exclusively the domain of the ultra-rich for those that are seeking an exclusive and risky adrenaline rush. Think paid trips to near space, summiting Everest, and yes, dives on deep-sea submersibles. Not everyone who has gone down to Titanic falls into all 3 categories of tourist. Some of Oceangate's passengers went into debt buying passage on the doomed submersible. David Leibowitz and Kimberly Miller won their passage in a contest. And Stockton Rush fell firmly into the wealthy adrenaline junkie category and never seemed to indicate any morbid or historical curiosity about the vessel. But Titanic's broad appeal and limited access has made it a hot ticket basically since its discovery. However, those hot tickets have been sitting on ice for the past 3 years because 5 people died in a very public way and brought a whole bunch of bad publicity to the industry. So let's talk about Oceangate. It's weird to plug my other podcast twice in an episode of this one, but we actually covered this one pretty in depth on Respect the Dead as well. On Father's Day 2023, a submersible named Titan, operated by the expeditions and tourism company Oceangate, imploded while on its descent to see the Titanic. Aboard were 5 passengers: Oceangate CEO Stockton Rush, Titanic expert Paul-Henri Nargeolet, businessman and adventurer Hamish Harding, businessman Shahzada Dawood, and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. Titan was an experimental submersible made out of carbon fiber, a material often used in the aerospace industry, but when it comes to deep-sea submersibles, titanium tends to be the preferred material. Titanium and quartz. But carbon fiber is significantly cheaper than titanium, and that was ultimately what appealed most to Stockton Rush. Not innovation, certainly not safety, but cost-effectiveness. The Titan was not classed, which is to say it wasn't certified by an official agency and deemed seaworthy. Like every company that has offered deep-sea tours to paying tourists, Oceangate styled their paid customers mission specialists and gave them little jobs aboard the vessel in order to skirt the legal and financial responsibilities that come with offering a commercial venture to paying tourists in the legal sense. Just as experimental was used as a euphemism to mean Titan was really unstable, mission specialist was a euphemism to mean someone who paid us $250,000 to put their life at unnecessary risk. Stockton Rush wanted to maximize his profits, which ultimately meant cutting whatever corners he felt like he could get away with cutting. And as a result, 4 other people lost their lives, including someone whose life had only just begun. In the center of Christine Dawood's kitchen sits a model of the Titanic. It's the $680 Lego set I mentioned earlier, made up of over 9,000 individual bricks. Before he took his ill-fated trip aboard the doomed Titan, Christine's son, Suleiman, spent hours putting it together, piece by piece. Suleiman had been in love with the Titanic ever since his parents had taken him to the touring exhibition in Singapore. Shahzada, Suleiman's father, stumbled upon an ad for Oceangate while scrolling the internet during the 2020 COVID lockdowns, and the Dallwoods began making moves toward a journey to see Titanic in person. They contacted a luxury travel agency they subscribed to and asked them about the Oceangate expeditions. The agency responded that they could make it happen, and in 2022, the agency reached back out to see if the Dallwoods were still interested in visiting the Titanic with Oceangate. Shahzada and Suleiman had never even been snorkeling before, but they wanted to go. In February of 2023, Stockton Rush and his wife, Wendy, flew to the UK to meet the Dallwoods and pitch the $250,000 per head journey on the sub. Stockton spun a rich yarn about the incredible marine life they'd see on the way down, glittering with bioluminescence. And then that moment when you reach the wreck and her bow emerges from the darkness. Shahzada was sold. The 2 tickets Shahzada purchased were originally intended for him and Christine, but Suleiman was so fascinated by Titanic. And it was Father's Day weekend. Christine offered her seat to Suleiman, who brought a Rubik's Cube with him so that he might try to set a world record for fastest deep-sea Rubik's Cube completion once they reached the wreck site. They were 500 meters above Titanic when Titan imploded. Suleiman's room and Shahzada's study remained the way they were when they left them. Shrines to the men they were, and reminders of 2 lives cut needlessly short. Earlier this year, Christine completed a 5-week hike from Hampton Court to Suleiman's former university in Glasgow, a feat he'd wanted to do himself before he passed. She plans on establishing a trauma and grief center for others like her. In a sickening sort of echo of the Titanic inquiries, Oceangate and its employees never faced criminal charges for the reckless business practices that contributed to the implosion. The American and Canadian investigations into the disaster, like the American and British inquiries a century before, merely recommended tighter regulations for passenger submersibles. But due to Oceangate, all commercial expeditions down to Titanic have been on indefinite hold. It's not an attractive package for most paying customers these days. And the public scandal of the disaster has people once again questioning the ethics of even traveling down to the wreck for scientific purposes. Given the danger, should we be sending people down there at all? Given the advanced decay of the wreck and her status as a gravesite, many think even unmanned vessels should be prohibited from dives. Still others argue that Titanic's rate of deterioration is a sign that RMS Titanic Inc. should be salvaging more artifacts, saving what they can before the wreck becomes completely inaccessible and collapses into a rust stain on the bottom of the Atlantic. It's a debate that involves marine archaeologists, treasure seekers, Twitter warriors, and even the US government. And it's next time on After Titanic. After Titanic is a podcast by Bashback Productions, written, recorded, and edited by Amanda Hoopman, music by Neely Farrell, artwork by Paul Scott Canavan. Full cast list, transcripts, and sources are available on AfterTitanic.com. After Titanic is supported by our generous Indiegogo backers and patrons. Help support the podcast by heading to patreon.com/AfterTitanic, where you'll get exclusive access to our Discord server and join an entire community of fellow Titanophiles to hang out with between episodes. I've been your host, Amanda Hoopman. Thanks for listening.